Investigators have now uncovered concealed underground access points beneath Nancy Guthrie's home, and the discovery has dramatically intensified the investigation. During a renewed search of the property, authorities shifted their attention below the structure into areas rarely examined unless conventional explanations begin to fail. Officials have not released detailed findings, but sources indicate that what was located beneath the house has forced investigators to reconsider how Nancy could have disappeared without forced entry, without witnesses, and without triggering alarms. This was not part of the original search plan. This was not speculative. It was a calculated response to something identified below the surface that could no longer be ignored. Tonight, we examine what prompted this shift, why subterranean access can completely alter the trajectory of a disappearance case, and what these developments could signal about what truly happened inside that home. If you're following this case closely, now is the time to pay attention. Subscribe now because the direction of this investigation has changed, and whatever answers exist may not be found above ground, but somewhere hidden beneath it. The underground access theory did not appear suddenly or without reason. It developed after investigators reached a threshold where traditional explanations stopped aligning with the facts. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from inside her home without clear forced entry, without witnesses, and without the disruption typically associated with a rapid nighttime removal. That absence of visible disturbance created pressure. When doors, windows, and cameras fail to explain movement, investigators are forced to examine what remains unseen. The early stages of the case focused on conventional exit points, entry logs, surveillance angles, alarm triggers, vehicle movement in the surrounding area. Everything that normally creates a detectable footprint was analyzed. And yet, the structure of the disappearance did not match the expected patterns. There was containment, there was speed, there was silence. Those three elements rarely coexist without deliberate planning. When surface pathways cannot account for movement, attention shifts downward. Not because investigators prefer dramatic theories, but because elimination demands it. If every visible route has been assessed and ruled insufficient, the next layer must be considered. Beneath most residential properties exist spaces rarely discussed unless something compels scrutiny. Crawl areas beneath foundations, utility channels, drainage corridors, construction voids. They are not designed for regular passage, but they exist nonetheless. The shift toward examining these spaces signaled something critical. It indicated that investigators no longer believed the disappearance could be explained solely by above-ground movement. This does not mean a tunnel was confirmed. It means it could not be dismissed. In high-consequence cases, uncertainty is treated as a vulnerability, and investigators close vulnerabilities methodically. Timing also raised questions. Reports suggest renewed focus below the structure occurred after earlier search phases were completed. That suggests a trigger, perhaps a structural anomaly, perhaps conflicting statements, perhaps inconsistencies within architectural documentation. Whatever the catalyst, it was significant enough to redirect resources. Below-ground searches are not routine extensions of property checks. They require specialized assessment. Structural integrity must be evaluated. Access feasibility must be measured. Movement continuity must be mapped. If investigators choose to commit personnel beneath a residence, it reflects a belief that something critical may exist there. Underground movement changes investigative assumptions entirely. Above ground, visibility governs risk. Cameras record, neighbors observe, lighting exposes activity. Beneath the surface, those variables dissolve. Sound dampens. Visual surveillance disappears. Entry and exit can occur beyond routine monitoring. In Nancy Guthrie's case, the defining contradiction remains the same. A disappearance within a constrained window, no confirmed forced entry, no auditory disturbance, and no observable exit. When those elements converge, investigators must ask whether the environment itself concealed the pathway. It is essential to understand that underground access does not require elaborate infrastructure. Even limited space capable of short movement could be sufficient. The question is not how extensive the network might be, but whether a viable route exists at all. Feasibility precedes assumption. Investigators examine soil patterns, structural beams, ventilation openings, insulation shifts, and deviations from original construction plans. They compare present conditions against historical records. They evaluate whether any modification could have enabled passage without detection. This process is deliberate and controlled. The presence of subterranean space alone does not imply use, but its existence expands possibility. And once possibility expands, investigative scope expands with it. This is the point where a case transitions from linear analysis to layered evaluation. When authorities move beneath a residence, the framework changes. The house is no longer just a location. It becomes a system with vertical dimensions. Each level must be understood before conclusions can be stabilized. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. It reflects recognition that silence may not indicate absence, but concealment. And concealment demands deeper examination. Once investigators commit to examining subterranean spaces, the methodology changes. Below-ground assessments are not dramatic operations. They are technical, incremental, and documentation-driven. Every inch is evaluated against what should exist versus what currently exists. Variations matter more than impressions. The first priority is access identification. Investigators determine whether entry beneath the structure is realistically achievable. Foundation vents, maintenance panels, narrow service gaps, and crawl openings are measured for clearance. Temporary widening or alteration is considered. Even minimal modifications can create usable passage if executed with preparation. Condition assessment follows. Subterranean environments are typically static. Dust accumulates undisturbed. Soil settles predictably. Insulation remains compressed in consistent patterns. Investigators search for deviations. Soil displacement inconsistent with long-term settling. Disturbed debris. Compression trails through insulation layers. These signs are subtle, but in controlled environments subtlety is evidence. Structural review becomes critical. Beams and supports are inspected for tampering. Fasteners are compared for uniformity. Patchwork materials are evaluated against known renovation history. Any element inconsistent with documented construction raises questions, especially in older properties where undocumented modifications may have occurred decades prior. Continuity mapping is equally important. A crawl space that terminates without external connection limits feasibility, but a space that intersects with utility corridors, drainage systems, or adjacent properties expands potential. Investigators trace these pathways carefully, not for speculation but for confirmation. Documentation also includes negative findings: absence of disturbance, absence of modification, absence of continuity. Eliminating possibility strengthens the investigative foundation. Each ruled-out pathway narrows focus. Public silence during this phase is strategic. Premature disclosure risks contamination. If underground feasibility is confirmed, revealing that information could alter behavior of anyone monitoring the investigation. It may prompt evidence destruction or communication changes. Law enforcement avoids influencing outcomes before verification is complete. Another critical factor is knowledge. Subterranean movement requires familiarity, awareness of access points, understanding of spatial layout, recognition of structural weaknesses. Investigators begin evaluating who would possess such knowledge: contractors, previous occupants, individuals with repeated access. Familiarity reshapes suspect assessment. This stage also requires recalibrating the timeline. If underground access is viable, assumptions regarding when Nancy Guthrie left visible areas may require revision. Traditional markers such as door openings or driveway activity become less central. Digital behavior, device disconnections, and environmental shifts gain prominence. Underground feasibility also introduces planning analysis. Movement below ground is rarely impulsive. It implies preparation, awareness of risk, confidence in concealment. Investigators examine whether the broader case reflects those characteristics. Was there coordination? Was there patience? Was there evidence of deliberate staging? Importantly, investigators assess whether subterranean movement could occur without immediate resistance. Disorientation within confined, unfamiliar space can suppress reaction. Confusion may replace confrontation. That psychological dimension informs why no overt alarm may have occurred. As feasibility strengthens, information control tightens. The more credible the pathway, the less publicly acknowledged it becomes. Confirmation shifts the investigation into a decisive stage. What began as elimination becomes validation. Could it happen transitions into did it happen? And that distinction defines the trajectory of the case. When underground access becomes more than a hypothetical, the case enters structural reassessment. Investigators begin overlaying confirmed subterranean routes onto known activity patterns. Alignment or contradiction determines next movement. If below-ground pathways align with unexplained gaps in surveillance, the theory strengthens. If timing discrepancies resolve under this model, it gains weight. Investigators seek consistency across data layers. Architecture must match timeline. Physical feasibility must match digital silence. Accountability shifts dramatically under this framework. Opportunity narrows. Random intrusion becomes less plausible. Planning becomes central. Familiarity with the environment becomes non-negotiable. Knowledge replaces coincidence. Investigators also evaluate motive in relation to method. Underground movement suggests concealment priority. It suggests desire to bypass visibility rather than confront it. That indicates calculated risk management rather than impulsive behavior. Even if subterranean access is ultimately ruled out, its serious consideration signals something profound. Surface explanations were insufficient. Traditional exit pathways failed to reconcile contradictions. That alone marks the case as structurally atypical. Silence from authorities during this period is telling. No confirmación, no denial. That restraint protects investigative integrity. Once underground feasibility is either confirmed or dismissed, public narrative may shift sharply. If confirmed, the house itself becomes instrument rather than backdrop. The environment transforms from passive location to active mechanism. That distinction reframes everything. It changes how events are reconstructed. It changes how responsibility is assigned. Investigators then proceed toward evidentiary consolidation. Structural findings are compared with behavioral analysis. Timeline adjustments are reconciled with communications. Every element must converge before movement forward occurs. This is not theatrical escalation. It is procedural inevitability. When disappearance defies visible logic, hidden logic must be examined. Nancy Guthrie did not vanish in chaos. The absence of chaos is precisely what redirected focus beneath the surface. Whether that direction yields confirmation or elimination, the investigative depth reveals how seriously contradictions are being addressed. In cases where silence dominates, structure becomes suspect. When nothing appears disturbed, disturbance may exist outside immediate view. That principle drives deeper inquiry. Once investigators move below ground, they cannot revert to surface certainty without resolution. The layered examination permanently alters investigative posture. Either subterranean feasibility collapses under scrutiny or it solidifies into central theory. If it solidifies, the case advances toward decisive action. If it collapses, elimination strengthens alternative paths. Either outcome clarifies trajectory. The critical truth remains unchanged. The investigation did not shift downward without cause. Something compelled it. Something disrupted initial assumptions strongly enough to justify dissent. And when law enforcement is compelled to explore what lies beneath, it reflects recognition that answers may not reside where everyone first looked. In disappearance cases defined by silence, depth becomes necessary. Whether beneath the structure investigators find confirmation or only elimination, the willingness to go there marks a turning point. The framework has expanded. The environment has been interrogated. The house has been treated as system, not scene. And once that transformation occurs, the investigation moves forward with a clarity that did not exist at the beginning. Nancy Guthrie was not lost to chance. Something deliberate unfolded. Something calculated. And the answer may exist beneath the silence everyone assumed was empty.